Welcome, dear YouTube Sangha, to another episode of Peace of Mind. I'm Dharma Peace.
I'm Dharma Ocean.
I'm Dharma Sense. Welcome to our channel.
Okay, so today we will discuss the culture of violence in the United States specifically. But before we begin, I have a quote to offer from the Dhammapada. The Buddha had said about violence, all tremble at violence. Life is dear to all. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill nor cause another to kill. The Dhammapada is a book of the Buddha's sayings. It's one of the materials that we can point to and say the Buddha said that. So what I just quoted is, as the phrase goes, from the horse's mouth or from the Buddha's mouth.
As Buddhists, we make a commitment to refrain from harming any living beings.
It's more than that
Now,
though, because we also can take it from an affirmative stance of like, I am vowing to uphold and protect life and to value it.
it's an affirmation. It's not a proscription. Like, it's not saying you can't do this. It's more like this is what can be done. Oh, and that reminds me of the Metta Sutta. This is what should be done, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and the Metta Sutta is a sutta where we vow to commit to non-harm and also loving kindness, right? And if you want to know more about that as it relates to the Brahma Viharas, the tenet of loving kindness, check out our video about the Brahma Viharas. What is meant by culture of violence? The culture of violence describes the way that people, citizens in a country, believe they should live their lives. In a sense, they almost see a virtue in violence. They do not associate anger with doing anything wrong, and that they think that anger is actually conducive to their life because it is a way that they can get what they want. And then just the way that we're raised and socialized in the United States, um, violence features a lot there.
Well, violence is prevalent in our society today. Just a month and a half ago, I had to leave work early and rush home as my daughter was locked with 7 other people in a single use bathroom in her high school, waiting for an hour and a half before the school was let free from the lockdown, from the threat.
Indeed.
So it's scary, it's prevalent. How can we make a difference? What can we
Yeah.
do to help?
I would say that we should all feel compelled to make a difference. And maybe that's just normative speech there where I'm saying what ought to be. But I think that's what we're here to do, right? We're saying
Mhm.
a change does need to be made because um, otherwise we don't have a peace of mind.
What is the root cause of violence in the first place?
Well, as a peace studies major and somebody is also an army veteran and a veteran of war, um, I would say that part of it has to do with our cultural norms, as I had mentioned earlier, that we have this I concept that we are exceptional, and by we I mean the United States, that we have this exceptionality, and people equate patriotism and being dominant, and in whether that translates to violence or harsh speech or anything like that, winning debates, for example, um, wherever there is a competition or a conflict, if someone punches you, you punch back, and that was how that's something that I've heard in my family, and I've heard uh, from other families as well, when and because they want to toughen their kids up so that they're not a pushover. But I think that it's an unwholesome way of seeing the world because you're just assuming that other people are out to get you, and it forms a cynical view of things where it's like, oh, well, I am, if I'm ever attacked, I should just defend myself.
It has a lot to do with the influences that we have. So
Mm.
in American society, like since its founding, basically, we've had this Second Amendment right, and there are a lot of people who uphold that like it's the last thing they're ever going to do.
Hmm.
Their right to own guns and to defend yourself. We have the Stand Your Grounds law. A lot of it has to do with policy, but also with influences, like how I mentioned, the influences that we're exposing ourselves to. So, like in American media, like TV, video games, news, movies, there's always like a bad guy and then a good guy, and the good guy uses
Exactly.
violence to attack him and kill him in a lot of instances. And even
Yeah.
things that are kid friendly, like Marvel, like we have
Yep. The
superheroes
Avengers,
that are
huge
like
one.
killing these bad
Yeah.
guys, and then everyone's like, "Yay, they're good guys!" And I guess so, but like there should also be more skillful means to subdue someone rather than to just kill them. And so, because we're
Right.
constantly being exposed to all of these unwholesome, violent things, it conditions our consciousness to become accustomed to it, and some people might um, become violent themselves in that case.
Both of you guys are highlighting a lot of societal pressure in terms of just how our culture is sort of socially. What is the difference between, say, the individual responsibility, like the violent urges, people, mental health issues? Where does that fall on the spectrum versus, programming from society?
Well, we have a culture of competition where, keeping up with the Joneses. It's a phrase to mean economically, one family, one household is looking at another one, and they feel pressure to have the same things that they have. So in America, we don't just have poverty, we have something called relative poverty. Poverty exists all around the world. As somebody is well traveled, I've seen lots of poverty everywhere. However, how cultures deal with it is very different. And so in America, lots of people resort to crime or resort to violence because of the way that they're thinking about relative poverty. It's basically jealousy and envy, right? Like it's the
Mhm.
opposite of mudita, sympathetic joy, right? Another Brahma Vihara. But so
Mhm.
basically, mudita teaches us as Buddhists that instead of looking at that person and saying they have what I don't have, I'm sad, therefore I'm also angry, and I want revenge, essentially.
Is it the extra societal pressure that allows for the violence?
Just my opinion, but I think that America is a pugilist society, meaning pugilist is a boxer, right? Like, I mean, look at what's going on in the media. Like right now, one of the biggest events we can see is Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul, and it's a huge spectacle. Which
Mhm.
as a former mixed martial artist, I kind of get it, but again, it's like that. It's so deeply ingrained in our culture to like think of things in this way. Like it's me versus them. It's like the underdog and the other guys, right? So I feel like a lot of it also kind of refers back to how someone it's a worldview. Like what is
Mhm.
someone's worldview? And how does that developed? How are they socialized? And a worldview is developed through all these experiences. I've said before that video games are like grooming for the military because
Mhm.
most of the video games that are popular are first person shooters. They are just straight up competitive environments where it's virtual warfare.
All of these external influences that we subject ourselves to are definitely going to condition us to be either desensitized to violence or to be prone to it. But I don't think that it's fair to say like if you play violent video games and you yourself will be violent. Because I used to play violent video games, but I find myself being a
Yeah.
peaceful person now. It's not like if
Yeah.
you do this, then you're suddenly going to turn into a serial killer. But it is an unwholesome factor that you're exposing yourself to, and if you're especially doing it constantly for many hours a day, like violence is not something we should be accustomed to. It's something that we should prevent and make an effort to minimize so that we can prevent the amount of suffering that we experience. In America, we experience the most gun violence. Like the second place from America is like not even close to us. We're several times higher in terms
Yes,
of
indeed.
violence, specifically gun violence. And so we need to do something about it. And, there's a lot of factors like availability to guns. I'm in support
Hmm.
of common sense gun laws so that criminals or mental health patients don't get access to them and start causing trouble. And I
Right.
also think that we shouldn't be selling assault weapons. I mean, it's called assault for a reason, right? Like you're using it
Right.
to assault someone. That should not be in the
Mhm.
hands of ordinary citizens. That's a military equipment.
The expressed purpose of an assault weapon is to take lives. There's just no way around that. It's to take as many lives as possible, and I know that as a combat veteran.
So
So
we're not gonna, you know, say like, oh, all every single gun should be banned. Start grabbing people's stuff. I don't think that that would work, and I don't think that it's
Mhm.
necessary. But I do think that we should make an effort to prevent all of these mass shootings that are happening. All of these mass shootings that are going on, because
Yeah,
it's a serious problem for us. And I don't want to hear about like what Sense was talking about, his daughter being stuck in a bathroom, fearing for her life. I don't think that that should be the norm in our society. We've got to do something about it.
yeah. And as a teacher, I feel is that I often have this conversation in my mind where it's like I have a duty of care to my students. Should I arm myself? Should I do something of that nature to prevent harm to my students? Ultimately, I say no. I honestly think that it could potentially cause more harm. There's always collateral damage. It's not a perfect world where we're 007 and we got the PPK and we're just GoldenEye, and threading a needle every time we pull the trigger. That is not reality,
Especially when it
right?
comes to handguns, right, which are typically
Yes,
very inaccurate.
indeed. And I know this because I was a ranged cadre. So many Americans are concerned about what's over across the borders. They think that, like Mexico is a criminal threat. But, when we have things like the prevalence of illegal arms trade like this in the United States that is basically on par with the global arms trade, no matter where you're looking, you have to wonder where should we focus our attention? you know, as far as policy wise, as a culture.
America is putting a whole lot of funding into the military research, and America spends a whole bunch of money on these things. Like it's significantly more than any other part of the budget. If I'm not mistaken, it was something like
That's right.
over
Yeah.
50% of our budget is spent on
Well
military.
above that. No, it's
And
well above that.
yeah, so it's
Mhm.
like, okay, what about like basic things that we need, like housing, infrastructure, education? Why is that not getting more of the budget? And it's all going to
Yeah.
military, and we're not even in a war.
In 2023, almost 43,000 people lost their lives because of firearms. I look back at the history of the Iraq War. That's 11 years, and th- it's 1/15 of that many fatalities. Like
But this is
so
all
one
happening within a single year,
in this one single year,
and it's only in America too, right?
and
This
it's only in America. So I think to anybody should be a crisis.
I think that probably the vast majority of Americans actually want common sense gun laws.
Hmm.
They're being blocked in Congress because Congress is essentially beholden to the NRA and highly funded groups that stand in the way of common sense legislation. We should encourage people to educate themselves on the issue to start
Hmm.
with, encourage people to contact their state and local representatives.
Talk about it, be informed on the issue.
For whatever
But
reason in America, people have this weird fetish around guns.
It's part of American culture that dates back, and it goes along with the idea of frontiersmen, freedom,
hmm
and
John
it's
Wayne,
enshrined
yeah,
in the Constitution. I
yeah,
don't think anybody is ever going to come and take people's guns away. I think
right.
the Second Amendment is firmly entrenched in the Constitution. We have kids dying in schools. We have guys shooting up people in Las Vegas with bump stocks and killing most people ever in one shooting. Uh, that we should just have common sense gun laws. Do the things that will make it won't fix the problem completely, but it'll make incremental progress.
Yeah, I believe in the Second Amendment, but the whole amendment, where it says, well, regulated. Those are the first three
Hmm.
words. Okay.
Yeah.
uh, the, we need to focus on, every aspect of it. I know that in Supreme Court they battle it out because they're worried about the slippery slope, and I get it, that
Yep.
causing a precedent where then it turns into like a civil war. And let's be real, when we start talking about taking guns and start talking about like gun policy in terms of extraction, then people will flip. It would
Right.
turn into, like we saw
Yeah.
the insurrection, and that was nothing. That was like a drop in the bucket
Mhm.
compared to what we would see if the Second Amendment was enforced in
Yeah.
totality.
Right.
Right. um
There's a difference between responsible ownership and irresponsible ownership.
That's the thing, is that people don't know how to use guns and respect them and to treat them like a weapon. People,
yeah.
like how Peace had mentioned, they treat them like toys. It's like people have this fascination with this thing and it gives them a sense of power or something like that. And
Yeah.
they think it's cool because they've seen it in the movies or whatever. But it is
When
basically a killing machine, these assault rifles. We should treat them
mm,
like that instead of as some kind of like man's toy, so to speak. It almost becomes like something that people like gun owners will hide behind as protection. Like, oh, I'm allowed to
mm,
do like this. I'm allowed to be irresponsible with the guns because the Second Amendment allows me to. And I think
exactly.
that's even more irresponsible because now like you're using politics as like a shield for being irresponsible with a killing weapon.
What
And many in that culture would tear down the government if they could and don't respect any of the other amendments.
what we want from policy wise is responsible regulations, like the well regulated part of the Second Amendment. We're not saying that we want to extract or ban or anything like that. We're just saying a lot of this starts out first. It starts with the mentality, which relates to
Mhm.
mental health and culture, and then
Mhm.
then the other implication is what is publicly admissible. Do we allow people to just have this like fetishization in public as a culture, or do we say have that conversation, like be responsible with that firearm? That is not a toy. You don't just go drag racing in the street with your car, right? Like
Right.
that's
Well, you
irresponsible.
mentioned car. Yeah, you mentioned car. Why can't it be like owning and driving a car? You have to get training,
Indeed.
you have to get licensed, you have to be insured.
In the
What the
state
hell?
of Florida, you do not have to receive any kind of training in order to own a firearm.
Yeah,
Like you
there's
don't
no
have
training.
the DMV of firearms,
You
Right.
can basically just walk into a firearm shop, buy a concealed weapon, and you can receive it in 3 days. And there's nothing stopping you from using that for harm. And there's no training class. I mean, there's hardly any regulation around it.
So I'm telling you,
Mhm.
as a veteran, when I was a soldier, the last person I want next to me is someone who doesn't know how to use their firearm. So
Yeah.
like if we're talking about an insurrection or talking about an invasion of some kind, like what are we actually afraid of as a country? We've seen what gets close to tyranny and then what happens when we get close to that, right? And I think that these arguments are just not grounded in reality. I think they're delusional.
Are you saying it's kind of more like a straw man argument? Like
It's a straw man,
we're gonna
yes,
put up
indeed.
this thing
Thank
and
you.
say, oh well, this is the reason why we need to have guns. Like,
Yeah.
why don't you just be
When what
honest?
you really are expressing is that you just want to have it. You
Exactly.
just
Like, just be honest and say that you like guns and
yeah.
think they're cool. I would at least respect you more for being honest.
If any situation were to call for a situation where we use those firearms to defend ourselves, we don't want people nearby that are not regulated. They're not trained in using that thing. Because
Right.
what happens is you have accidental discharges and negligent discharges and collateral damage or friendly fire. All these are not things that you want to happen.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that's what we have as a country, all four of those
Right.
conditions every
Right.
day.
Speaking for myself, I am I am not anti-gun. I
Yeah.
took hunter safety when I was 11 years old. I grew up hunting with my dad. I've been proficient in guns essentially the majority of my life. Um, but I am anti-violence, and I
Yes.
am anti-lax laws that allow for the violence.
The Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh says that when we consume things, we have to be mindful of it, that it doesn't make us ill in the sense of, as far as consumables and also for mental health as well. If we feel upset ourselves, it's best to just, walk away or log out for a second and
Mhm.
meditate. That is the wise thing to do. We have several organizations that are dedicated to responsible common sense gun policies. We've got the Sandy Hook Promise organization, Giffords, uh, Every Town for Gun Safety, Brady. Those are not by at all of the organizations, but I will put them in a description. I want to encourage that we participate with these foundations, but also to encourage a galvanization.
We need a
Yes,
critical mass of people to make a difference.
indeed, because we have these organizations, but we are strong. Our power comes from unity, right? That's called popular sovereignty. It's a very American concept.
If we're ever going to make a change in this gun violence problem that we're experiencing, we need to come together and start voting and making our voices heard and start doing something about the mental health, because that also is a huge factor in this too. I think a lot of people have become apathetic to the whole thing. Like, I think that, it's like, oh, well, it's not affecting me in particular, and like my family or myself hasn't died from gun violence, and therefore we can just be complacent about it.
Hmm.
Like, okay, when it happens in your town and someone you care about dies, then maybe you're going to care. Like,
But
thousands
there's
of people
also
each year are dying from this thing. We've got to do something about it.
a lot of people feel like they just don't have the time or the opportunity to make a change. We have a shared responsibility as citizens, and then responsible adults make time somewhere in the day to do the civic duty.
Well, I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head in terms of talking about apathy. I think people are apathetic about it. I think, statistically speaking, I think the number of people that did not vote in the last presidential election is much larger than the numbers that voted for
Yeah.
either party. And so people just and politically aren't active. And I think a lot of people think that, oh, they're all alike and my vote won't
Yep.
make a difference. Um, I think that's a fallacy. I think people need to get out to vote, and it's the most fundamental right that you have, and you should take advantage of it. In terms of being American, I'm not going to tell anybody how to vote, but I would tell people to exercise your right for sure. How do we cope with a culture of violence?
It goes back to the Brahma Viharas, right? It's
Yeah.
our first Delicious Dharma episode. It goes back to that because at the end of the day, compassion is what's going to be able to motivate you to want to do something about these things in the first place. So
Mm.
if you can practice compassion and love and kindness for your fellow Americans, this is your home and you
Yeah.
should do what you can to protect it. So you need to get out there, start signing petitions that promote nonviolence, vote, of course, like how Sense mentioned, but also get involved. If you know someone who is experiencing violence of any kind, whether it be through like a significant other or through guns or through any other kind of violence, make an effort to go and help them because it's probably causing them a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
So being engaged with your community and making an effort to make a change.
Part of the issue also relates to toxic masculinity. And that's a major part of our like cultural upbringing. As a boy, you're growing up and you're being socialized in a certain way, and basically you're being told this is how you be a man. You don't cry, you don't show your feelings, you don't hug, you don't kiss, because that's yucky stuff, and you don't talk about your mother and your mommy and
We need to teach our men to have good skills to deal with their emotions instead of telling them to repress them, which will then
indeed.
cause mental health issues and then cause them to be more likely to be violent in the first place.
All violence comes from a place of suffering. And I think it's important for us as Buddhists to remember that we all suffer. And so knowing that we all want to avoid suffering and be happy, and every person experiences that same thing, that we have compassion even for those who are committing violence. We don't want to have contempt for others. We don't want to be condescending. We just want to fix the issue. And the best way, I think, to do that, again, circling back to what Ocean had said, is the practice of the Brahma Viharas.
Equanimity is a great tenet when it comes to that, because we don't want to be reactionary to these issues. The knee-jerk reaction is to express outrage.
When you see these violent acts occur, it should motivate you and make you determined to make a difference in the world,
Indeed.
and inspire you to be on the path of peace, because you see how much suffering and how much destruction it causes in families and societies. Here in Orlando, the Pulse shooting of 2016 was a huge deal. I mean, it completely tore apart the LGBT community in this town, and so many people were suffering because of it. So clearly, we need to do something about this, and coming together and making an effort to promote peace is something that can help us to alleviate that issue, but without being outraged or without causing violence, because the Shakyamuni Buddha said, violence will only ever beget more violence. We cannot retaliate against these people because it's just going to cause a cycle of more violence.
Hatred never ceases by hatred alone, but by love alone is healed.
Yeah, and that's a law eternal. That's what the Buddha said.
I believe also in the Dhammapada, right?
Yes, in the Dhammapada. In the Buddhist tradition, there's this concept called samvega, which means divine impetus. It's something that's upsetting you to the point to where you know you need to change something. And then you get in. So that is the feeling that I'm talking about, is like this samvega. When you get more skillful in your practice, you have basically something called pasada, which means a confidence, a spiritual confidence in knowing that what you are doing is the right thing. So even when people say something doubtful to you, or you don't get derailed, because you know that this is the right way, this is the right intention, the right thought.
It takes a while to get to that point, though, because without having right view, we're subject to being deluded. And then we could also have this samvega, in a sense that we're going down the wrong path and are going to be persistent in that wrong path, thinking that we're doing something right when in fact we're deluded. So we need to be mindful about what is it that...
Don't stop at samvega. That is not the stopping point. Right? But
so
sorry, what were you gonna say?
We need to be mindful with our perceptions and our views of the world, so that we don't get carried into a wrong perception that winds up causing more suffering. So being persistent is good, but you first need to analyze your views and make sure, is this a good view to have, and does it actually take us towards more peace, or is it going to be destructive?
And that's why sangha is important. We find like-minded people who keep us accountable, so that we're not, wandering off into the wrong territory or having the wrong views, right? Like, someone's there to remind us, upekkha.
That's right. So why don't we close with maybe just a few more solutions and on tools that people can deal with this kind of thing.
Okay.
So I did a little research about things you can do, and I came up with a list of about 12 things. Educate yourself, contact your local or state reps, tell your story, let the data do the talking, address specific legislation, support gun sense candidates, get out the vote, donate to advocacy groups, join a local prevention organization, hold a social media fundraiser, run for office, like Dharma Peace should do, and join protests and rallies, and keep fighting and never give up.
I'm sorry, that came completely out of left field, but
caught me off guard. Almost like make a little list for yourself, a personal list of like how to conceptualize the issue, instead of letting media tell you what you should think about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Write it
should
down.
we should
And
feel
yeah,
empowered to do something about this rather than kind of just let it bog us down and ruin our day. We should use that uneasy feeling that we get when we hear about these things and use that as motivation to go out and do something about it. Like, we don't have to just sit idly by and do nothing. We can do something, even if it's simple, like just send a letter to your congressman, like how Sense mentioned. Do something so that, you know, you're contributing towards a positive cause. It'll make you feel better at the end of the day anyway.
political participation is important. Civic health is important. So if you fancy yourself a responsible adult, you know, as I feel, we should engage in this way. We need to change our mindset, because this is our nation, and if we love our nation, if we love our people, it should really strike a chord with us when we hear nearly 43,000 people have passed away as a result of firearms, and some number of them are children.
There are 1 billion guns in global circulation. Guns are the leading cause of death of children in the U.S. As of May 31st, which is about 3 weeks ago as of this recording, 318 people have been killed, 836 have been wounded. There have been 225 shootings with 4 or more victims. We want to be able to go to concerts and not have to worry about being gunned down. We want to be able to go to 4th of July celebrations. We want to just feel safe in society. We want our kids to be able to grow up in a safe society. Like me personally, I enjoyed when I grew up. The idea of a school shooting when I was in high school was absurd. Nobody even considered anything like that. And so that it's become commonplace today is really sad commentary on how our nation has progressed to this point on the issue of violence. But I know we can do better. I always have hope for the human race. We proved ourselves to be very successful in crisis in the past, and I'm sure we can be again.
So, Peace, earlier you had said, we don't want to tell people what should and should not be done, but I'm going to break that rule. This is what should be done. Go out and meditate. Meditate. If you haven't meditated today, this is your bell of mindfulness. Meditate at least 10 minutes.
Well, I can second that. Yes.
I'll third that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a long sit after this, because this is this topic. You know, it's harrowing, and
It's a heavy topic, especially when we
yeah,
talk
and
about
when I hear
our
about
kids being
the
shot.
children.
I mean, right. It's a heavy topic. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Hey.
All right, dear Sangha, if you made it to the end of this video, we really thank you and appreciate you. If you have anything to share with us, good or bad, please leave a comment, description. We will try to respond to you, and maybe you can be featured in the next episode.
Be nice to us, though. We're fragile.
All right, so dear YouTube Sangha, if you got to the end of this video, we commend you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.